الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We welcome everyone in this webinar, and we are excited to have you here for this special session entitled Committee for Leadership, and talking about how can we develop the next generation. Let me start by introducing the National Center of the Family Businesses. It was established by a royal decree, and it works to achieve its mission by providing services and effective communication with family businesses, government agencies, advisory bodies, and community and public. And the objective here is to build an integrated system that contributes and enhancing the sustainability and the growth of the family businesses here in Saudi Arabia. And when we talk about the family businesses here in Saudi Arabia, according to a previous study that we have conducted here in the center, and we published at the beginning of 2024, so it's a recent study, we found out that family businesses in Saudi Arabia represents approximately 95% of the enterprises and businesses operating in the Saudi Arabia. It employs 57% of the private sectors and 48% of the total workforce in Saudi Arabia, contributing, and I want to emphasize that, contributing to 62% of the private GDP. The center here works to serve family businesses by providing different programs like this webinar, events, awareness activities, and recently we launched ADR program trying to resolve the conflicts that arise in family businesses, also providing different opportunities to build relationships and exchange experiences between family businesses here in Saudi Arabia. Also, the center works to communicate effectively with the community and the general public, demonstrating the positive role that the family businesses here in Saudi Arabia play in society. Also, we are working with researchers, universities, preparing training program like Certified Family Businesses Consultant Program or ADR programs to resolve the conflicts that might arise in family businesses. Also, we are trying to document any issues that the family businesses might face and to voice their concerns to the government or the related entities. Today's topics, Committee for Leadership Development, setting the next generation family leaders up for success, is extremely important. According to the study that I previously mentioned, almost all surveyed family businesses here in Saudi Arabia admit that they require a proper succession planning and training, and they said there is no significant difference between if you are a large family businesses or one who is working in the medium tier or bracket. They need a succession planning, a training, and it seems that this kind of need is universal across all maturities and across all different sizes. And the issue that we are facing here in Saudi Arabia, that there are not many available succession planning and courses, and this is why this webinar try to address this issue and to tackle this issue with our experts today. We have with us Sam or Samuel. He is a partner and co-founder of the Generation Transition Advisors, and Hilla, also a partner in the Generation Transition Advisors. Sam is a family advisor with experience in change management and next generation development. And Hilla also is a family advisor with a huge experience in strategy and talent development. Generation Transition Advisors, GTA, is a company who's focusing on the medium to large businesses, trying to support them in their transition from now gen to the next generation. And they are working with both the senior and the next generation to design and implement governance structure and increase teamwork and skills. Without further ado, let Hilla give you some of the important and insightful information that they prepare for us. So, Hilla, you might start.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sohail. Very much appreciate the introduction, and a big thank you to the National Center for Family Business for hosting us and giving us the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I know there was a question about will there be a presentation. I'm just about to share my screen. Can all of you see my screen? Maybe Sam, give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Perfect. Great. So we're here to talk to you today about a topic that's very close to our hearts, around how to set up family members who work in their family business for success. It's a topic that both Sam and myself have spent a lot of time on and worked with many families on. And so we'd be delighted to share a little bit of what we've learned along the way with all of you. We'll start, I think Dr. Sohail has already given you a lot of context and intro on our firm, Generation Transition Advisors, but we'll quickly introduce ourselves. Then we'll spend a few minutes talking about what some of the challenges are, at least that we've seen in our work with families that surround the employment of family members in the business. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time that we have with you deep diving on a case, which will really bring to life both some of the challenges as well as some of the practices that families can follow to navigate through those situations. And then we'll try to leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions, because we'd love to make this as interactive as possible and as useful as possible for all of you. So please do pepper us with any questions that come to mind when we get to the Q&A towards the end. And Sam and I would also be very happy to take questions offline as well. So please feel free to reach out to us even after today's session. We'd be very happy to share any thoughts from our side. So perhaps very quick introductions on who we are, just so you know a little bit more about the faces you're seeing on the screen in front of you, and then we'll dive in. Sam, do you want to have a go?
Sure, I can start. Good afternoon, everyone. We're delighted to be here. My name is Sam Bruhel. I'm a family business advisor, co-founder of GTA, as both Sohail and Hilla have noted, and I'm based in Boston. I've been working in this field for about 15 years, and I would say about half of my career, a good portion of it has been spent in Saudi Arabia, where I've worked with a number of large business owning families in your country. It has been a wonderful experience. It's been great to see how Saudi Arabia has transformed over the past 10 years and all of the exciting things that are going on there. I think, as I said, I'm based in Boston. I've got two wonderful children and a wonderful wife, a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, and looking forward to sharing with you our experiences related to this work today.
Great, thank you, Sam. So my name, as you all know, is Hilla Talati. I'm also a partner with GTA. I'm based in Dubai, and I've lived in the Gulf now for about the last 18 years. I spent the first 10 years or so of my career in management consulting with McKinsey & Company, and was part of the family business practice there, and so had the opportunity of working with a number of big families across the Gulf, and particularly in Saudi Arabia, on a variety of topics. I then spent about 6 years working in-house with a large Dubai headquartered family group, working with the first and the second generation on setting priorities for the future and driving the owner's agenda. I also got to lead HR as CHRO for their business for a couple of years during that time. So really got to see the talent side of things closely as well, and the intersection between family and talent issues. I've been with GTA for a couple of years and very much based in the region. So I think without further ado, let's dive into our topic. All right, why have we chosen this topic and why do we think it's important? So first of all, I think one thing that we've noticed consistently in our work with many, many families in this part of the world, as well as other geographies, is that managing employment of family members in the business can often be quite difficult, right? I think we've seen that, even for families that put a lot of effort and thought into their governance, into their structures, into their policies, they might spend lots and lots of time and effort on defining an employment policy and determining what are the rules for people to enter, right? And so they feel, okay, we've put certain things in place, we have a process. But often, once family members start entering the business, even following the rules that they've put down in their policies, a number of unanticipated challenges that can arise, right? And I'm just going to run through some of the challenges that we've seen.
So Hilla, sorry for interrupting.
No, go
Sorry
ahead.
for interrupting. If you just can you click on turn off reactions just to close it.
Sorry, click on what?
Can you turn off? Yeah, click on it. The X. Yeah, the X. Yeah.
Oh, it's not clicking.
Does it work? Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Sohail. So a number of challenges can arise. First, it might be that the family member doesn't get honest feedback. Everybody treats him or her like the boss's son or daughter. And so the person doesn't have a sense of how they're doing. The family member might be put in a role that he or she feels is not a good fit for his interests or skills, right? It might be that, okay, there was an opening, the person got put in that opening, and then they feel that they're stuck and they don't have a way of getting out of that role that they've been put in. We've definitely seen some cases where non-family members can actually be quite hostile towards family employees because they think that they are not qualified, they think they may be entitled, and they don't give them a fair chance and a fair shot. This is one that we see a lot. Often family businesses are much more entrepreneurial environments. And so family members get thrown in without always a lot of clarity on roles and expectations. And sometimes that can be quite tough for the family member who's going through it, and it can create anxiety and insecurity. Once family members enter, decisions on career progression can become quite difficult, particularly when we're talking about, let's say, third generation family members. So you have multiple cousins from multiple different branches. And I think the senior generation in that situation can often find it quite difficult because it's hard to have honest conversations, for example, about, which cousin should get promoted, which cousin is maybe not doing well when they're talking about their siblings' children and their own children. So often those conversations just don't happen because they are sensitive and difficult. There could also be, in a case like that, the risk of creating rivalry amongst cousins. So who's going to get promoted, who gets the top job, who moves fastest. This can create a sense of distrust amongst cousins, which is definitely not healthy in a family business. And then you could also end up in a situation where, particularly where there are multiple businesses, family members end up joining the part of the portfolio that, let's say, their father ran. And so you end up creating silos amongst cousins, which can also be quite unhealthy from a long-term perspective. So these are certainly not all the challenges that can arise, but these are some of the challenges that we've seen arise actually, I would say, very often when looking at the employment of family members in the business. And it would be great to just get some quick reactions, either whichever emoji is on hand. Do these challenges feel familiar? Can you relate to one or more of them? If yes, it would be great if you can just sort of react. Okay, I see at least one thumbs up floating up, and a few more. That's great. So, and that's what we've definitely seen anecdotally, and it's something that we also see in the data. And we'll share with you some stats that were published by the Family Business Council of the Gulf from a few years back regarding the employment of family members in their family businesses. And this is not Saudi specific, but it's across the Gulf, but I would imagine would be quite representative. So what we see is that, and also one thing to note is this is some of the larger family businesses in the region. I would imagine some of these numbers would look smaller with a broader population. So about 44% of families in the region say that they have an employment policy. That sounds fairly positive, about close to half of families. But despite having a family employment policy in place, about only 32% feel that they've actually clarified the roles and responsibilities of family members. So we're already down to just about a third where the roles are clear. 22% believe that they have effective training programs, which means that in 4 out of 5 cases, family members aren't getting appropriate and effective training. And finally, only 17% say that they have an effective method for assessing family members who are in the business. So a lot of what we sort of described as anecdote is very much borne out in the data as well, that families find it difficult when it comes to being clear about roles, to making sure good training is in place and making sure that we're actually making meaningful assessments.
In fact, Hilla, these, as you said, these numbers are similar even in Saudi Arabia, but according to our study, these percentages are lower here in Saudi Arabia. Almost 11% are saying that they have effective assessment method to determine who's the successor in the family businesses. So, and this is why it's really a big issue.
That's great. That's great. And succession is difficult, right? There's never a silver bullet for it. So in a way, it's not surprising that the numbers are low, and it's probably refreshingly honest. So we'll talk a little bit about how can we deal with some of these challenges. One quick note that we want to make is that in many ways the challenge is compounded by the fact that there aren't always good HR processes in place for family members. Part of the reason might be that HR itself is still evolving within the family business. I think there's a very wide range of practices in terms of what we see. There are some family businesses with very sophisticated HR, and there are other family businesses that maybe have not invested as much in HR. So I think that could be one reason. But even in situations where there are very strong and good HR teams, those practices don't always get applied to family members, because it might be because HR teams don't feel comfortable being completely honest when it comes to family members. And it might also be that HR teams aren't given full visibility and access to the performance of family members because it's seen as something confidential and sensitive. And as a result of that, family members often end up slipping through the cracks, right? And so as a result of that, there are many questions that end up cropping up in the minds of both the senior generation and the next generation that, in the absence of a good process or structure, end up going unanswered. So from the senior generation's perspective, how can I best integrate my children into the business and have them work well with non-family leaders? How do I manage the development and progression of G3 to become future leaders? And how will I manage that assessment and selection process? As they go along the way, how do I make sure people get good feedback so that there are no surprises? And how do I make sure that there's good cross-generational engagement, right? Whether it's across G2 and G3, which I would imagine is the most common generations that you would see in the region. Of course, it could also be any other two generations, so that they start to understand things as a whole. I think from the rising generations perspective, there may often be questions about, what are pathways for G3 members to progress into future roles, and how can non-family members support the process? What are expectations of the next gen to progress to leadership roles? And also a concern that, at the end of the day, there are few top jobs. How is that process going to be managed when there are several cousins who might be competing for those roles? So we've talked, I think, a bit about the challenges. What we're going to do now is deep dive into a case study, because we thought that it's really through the story of how another family dealt with some of these challenges that we can talk about some of the good practices that we've seen other families take on, and that we've also helped them with. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hilla. So before we jump into the case study, first just want to preface that this is a real family, but a disguised case. So all of the characters in this case are fictitious, but the situation is very much in play. So let's start off by taking you to the case. So just a brief overview. The current leadership structure in this particular family, there are 4 brothers. They're in their 60s. They're each about 2 to 3 years difference in age, and they're in the second generation, and they collectively own a trading company in the GCC. 3 serve in executive roles, and the eldest brother serves as chairman of this business. The G1 founder is still very much alive and well. He's 92 years old, and he has remained as chairman emeritus. So he does still come to the office. Some of you probably can relate to that, and likes to think he's very much engaged. But he has done actually a really remarkable job in terms of turning over leadership and decision-making authority to his 4 sons. In the third generation, there are 12 cousins in the third generation, and 4 of them over the past several years had decided to join the family business after gaining some outside work experience. The brothers very much wanted the next generation to come into the business, but one of the things that they were very conscious of in raising their children is that they wanted them to each be able to pursue their passions and to gain some valuable life experiences, and then hopefully come back and join. And thankfully, I think they got their wish, and a few of these 4 members of the third generation have come back, and there'll maybe some more down the road as well. The brothers also put in place a very strong non-family professional management to support operations of the business, which I'll talk about in a second when we look at the organizational chart. In terms of family dynamics, the brothers maintain very good working relationships with each other. So I would say this system is a relatively low conflict system compared to some of the other families that Hilla and I work with. The G3 siblings have good relationships amongst themselves. They're a pretty cohesive group. They have some good family traditions. They are pretty disciplined about coming together once a year for a family retreat. And that has been something that's really been in place throughout the lives for the cousins. So it's something they look forward to. It's something they really think has helped to cultivate a sense of unity within the family. And it's a tradition that will continue. There is a little bit of underlying frustration amongst the G3 who joined the business toward G2 because they feel like there is a bit of lack of clarity with regard to their career progression. Some of them said, we came into the business and they didn't really know what to do with us. And there really hasn't been the guidance in the roles that they thought would be helpful. And then the last thing is compensation. I think each of them complains a little bit that they're not making as much money as their friends. So those are the things that they would like to see strengthened, and the things that we'll talk a little bit about as we go through the case. So Hilla, you can go to the next slide. So this is the organizational chart. They created a family holding company that oversees the three major business units in this particular trading company. There's a major electronics trading business. They have a series of casual and fast service restaurants, and they have a real estate portfolio. Within the holding company, the brothers serve as the four board members. You'll see the G1 there is grayed out because he is kind of a presence in the room, despite the fact that the brothers have leadership of the business at this point in time. This is a fairly progressive family in the sense that they made the decision to bring in some independent directors to also serve on their holding company board that have expertise in these various businesses that the family owns. And they have a family office. Within the underlying operating businesses, at this point in time, the brothers still serve as the presidents of the various businesses. The way we like to think about the president's role in this particular context is, or the way they like to think about it, is they're active owners. So they're representatives of the family in these businesses. They make sure that the ownership interests of the family are protected, but they have empowered the non-family general managers to really oversee the day-to-day operations. So the non-family general managers are much more kind of rolling up their sleeves and getting into the day-to-day, and the brothers are overseeing things from their respective positions. So that is the general leadership structure. And then within the third generation, they were very conscious when the members of the third generation started to join to not put a particular cousin in the third generation under a father. So in this particular case, Khalid, who is the son of the president of the quick service business, joined the electronics business, and Abdullah is the son of the brother in the electronics business, and Hamza is also the son of the brother in the electronics business. So they've segmented things that way, and that worked pretty well to avoid any potential sort of conflicts of interest or anything like that. So we will now move on, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about the career trajectories of Sarah, of Khalid, Abdullah, and Hamza. So Khalid was the first mover in the third generation. He was the first one to take the risk to join the family business. He started his career after graduating from college, working in a marketing firm where he was doing marketing analytics. Khalid is quite analytical. He is a little bit introverted, very much a numbers guy. So it was interesting that when he joined the family business, the brothers decided to put him into a role as a product manager for one of the technology products within the electronics business, where he worked for 2 years. So he was essentially a brand manager, and he thought the role was interesting. It was very different from what he was doing in marketing analytics. He had to oversee advertising campaigns. He had to think about the brand management. He had to think about the strategy for those things. So it was really different from what he was doing in his first job, and it was refreshing. But he also kind of had this sense that it really wasn't totally connected to what his longer term interests were. I think he was more interested in solving problems and doing things that were more strategic. And he felt that, it wasn't really piquing his interests. He ultimately, after about 2 years or so, transitioned to the role of sales manager, doing business-to-business sales within the group. And the reason for that, from the brother's standpoint, was that if Khalid was going to play more of a leadership role in this business over the long run, they thought it was important for him to really understand the customers. And the best way to understand the customers from their standpoint was for him to get out there and be in the field. They also thought, he's a little bit introverted, and maybe this would be a good opportunity for him to break out of his shell a little bit and to, try to be more extroverted and to get to know and to work more on his interpersonal relationships. So that is the path that Khalid had taken up until this point. Now, as we started to work with them and we sat down with Khalid to learn a little bit more about kind of where he was in his career, what he was interested in, and what the challenges were, he made it clear that one of the things that was frustrating was that the expectations for his role and the authority he felt were not really clear. So we were like, well, what do you really mean by that? He said, well, I'm a future owner. I'm a brand manager. I'm in a sales management role now, and I see problems in this business, and I'm not really sure, what my role is in speaking up to address those particular issues. He said, if I spoke to my grandfather would say, absolutely, you should be in a leadership role at this point, and you should be, taking on these issues and helping to drive things forward. But the brothers had a more reserved, more conservative perspective. They really wanted Khalid to stay in his lane and to learn the business and to grow more gradually over time. So there was tension there. He wanted to gain a broader understanding of the family businesses overall. He felt like over the 3 to 4 years or so that he'd been in the business at this point in time, that he was quite siloed. He didn't really have a lot of visibility into the portfolio overall. Even the broader business of the electronics group, he felt like he kind of understood pieces of it that he'd been exposed to, but didn't really have a broad perspective. And there was also the sense that the general manager that ultimately Khalid worked under, that there was a bit of sense of competition between the two. It wasn't explicit, but he did feel like the general manager was not always as helpful in terms of providing guidance. He felt like there could have been more direction provided by him. And there was a sense that, maybe the general manager was thinking that at some point in time, Khalid would be taking his job, which, if there had actually been some conversations about that, was really never going to be the case. I think the brothers very much thought this idea of having a non-family member in the general manager role was an important part of their leadership model. And they never thought of that role as something that a family member might play in the future, but it just wasn't discussed. So we can go on to the next one. So Abdullah gained his outside work experience in quick service businesses in Europe. He was always very much interested in restaurant management. And I think in the back of his head, he thought that there could be an opportunity down the road based on that experience to come back into the family business. He came back in after several years of working for a restaurant chain in Europe, and he joined the family business. What was interesting, though, is that in this particular case, I think it was in part because of the experience he'd had outside. The brothers didn't really give him a clear role. They said, yes, come in. You have such great experiences. You can add a lot of value. We have some problems in this business. And you could maybe work under the general manager for the first year and help to address some of the issues that we're dealing with. And he thought it sounded exciting. He could be creative. He could take on some of these issues. But when he got in and started to actually work within that environment, he actually found it a little bit frustrating because he didn't have a clear role. People in the organization saw him as, the owner's son. And he just felt a little bit awkward, not really knowing exactly what his place was within the structure of the group. He ultimately, after the first year, transitioned to the role of supply chain manager, which was the position he then held for the next 2 years. And it was a good position for him. I mean, Abdullah was a problem solver, much like Khalid. He was a good critical thinker, and the experience he had outside in terms of understanding some more sophisticated systems and processes from some of these other businesses, he was able to bring into that particular role. That said, when we spoke to him, the feedback was he really felt there was a lack of direction in that first year. It left a bit of a bad taste in his mouth because he felt like he was kind of just put out there and not set up as well as he could have been for success. Working with others within his team, he would see things and he would want to drive change, but he felt like for whatever reason, and I think it was in part because of his communication style, he was having a hard time getting people to align with his vision and his goals. And he wasn't really sure, because he was a family member, how he could raise these particular business issues with the non-family general manager or the G2 brothers. So he didn't want to be seen as going over the general manager. He also didn't want to be seen as being too presumptive and kind of being a know-it-all with the general manager. So these were some of the things that were just kind of circulating in his mind, and he really wasn't discussing them with anybody until we started to get a little bit more involved in the project. The next one is Hamza, and Hamza was an interesting case. He, of the cousins that decided to join, he was definitely the most aggressive in terms of business-minded. He studied finance in London. He worked at a real estate investment firm. He was very much a type A personality, pretty hard driving. But his personality was tough. He was one of these people I think that just came across as a bit of a know-it-all and just strong. And so when he decided to join the family business, in part because he just wanted a change, he also thought he could add a lot of value based on his outside experience. So he spoke to his uncle, and I think his uncle, at the end of the day, was excited to have him. He had a lot of valuable experience, and he could, bring some pretty significant horsepower to the family business in the real estate division that his uncle was running. But when he got into the business, the big personality that he had, first and foremost, it clashed with his uncle, and I don't think his uncle totally anticipated that this would be as much of an issue as it was. And the way that he just communicated with his uncle and with others was a bit abrasive. So for Hamza, the big issue was really learning how to have more interpersonal sensitivity with his uncle, his team, how to communicate differently, and to be generally more self-aware. So even though he was very bright and he could add a lot of value, a lot of that was overshadowed by just the way he came across to others. And then Sarah, she was wonderful. She studied art and design in London. She worked for a marketing agency for a couple of years, was quite successful. She ultimately came back. She got married, and wanted to continue to do something that was professional, but realized that maybe a full-time corporate job really wasn't going to work for her at this stage in her life. And she was offered the role of family office director, which is something that was relatively new for the family. They wanted to create a family office at this point because the family had gotten quite a bit more complex. There were some business complexities, and they thought it would be helpful to have someone to help organize some of the services for the family, to support with some of the administrative matters for G2, and to help address some of the corporate issues around the board. So this was not an investment office, at least not at this point. This is more of a shared services office for the family, an administrative support office for the holding company. So Sarah joined, and when she did that, it was a new role. I think they weren't really sure kind of how that was going to work, and she felt also kind of this lack of sense of direction. Compared to the work that she'd done in London in the marketing agency, she was doing a lot more administrative work. So even though it was more relaxed than the work she had done previously, it was definitely not leveraging those creative juices that she has as someone that's quite artistic. And she she was a servant leader in the sense that she didn't complain about these things. She was very organized. She was diligent. She did a good job. But in the back of her mind, she was saying, I could be offering a lot more here. And, I think that, it would be interesting to me if I could take this role to another level. In part because she was doing so much administrative work, she had people working under her, but she wasn't delegating as much as she could have been. And we talked to her a bit about the fact that, if she started to offload some of the administrative things, she could start to focus more on, this new family office and the strategy for it and how it could evolve over the next 2 to 3 years to be a bit more of a structured and robust group for the family. And this was the first time she'd really been in a leadership role. And a leadership role in the family. So part of it was also learning how to communicate effectively with the broader family in this new position that she was in. So there are all these challenges, and we're hearing these things and thinking, it's great that the brothers were able to bring this talented group of G3 cousins into the business. And they get many, many positive marks for, requiring the outside work experience, having diligent family members in the third generation who are pretty hardworking and disciplined. But there were these underlying issues that if they weren't addressed, were going to become bigger problems down the road. And they also had a talented group, and they really hadn't thought much about, how each of them was going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years and what leadership succession, might look like for each of them, given who they are and given where the organization is and where the family is. And so what we recommended was that they establish a committee called the Committee for Leadership Development. And this is a group we've used with other families, and we've seen it be quite successful in terms of how it plays a role in supporting talent development within the family, but also the leadership succession process, which takes years. It's not something that happens overnight. And in this particular case, because they had the holding company board, it was agreed that it would make sense for this particular group to sit as a subcommittee of the holding company board, and that 2 representatives, so 2 of the brothers, would serve on this group. One of the independent directors who had some HR experience and was generally just interested in supporting with development of younger people, joined as well. He was quite trusted. And then they also had a head of human resources that was at the holding company level in what they called shared services. So it was the individual was really responsible for ensuring consistent recruitment practices, HR standards across the three business units. So the 4 of them made up the Leadership Development Committee. And then they laid out a set of responsibilities that this group was going to take on. And the first piece was for any G3s that were coming into the business going forward to take that responsibility away from the brothers entirely. 2 of the brothers obviously would have a role in this, but to oversee the placement of next generation family members into the business and to ensure they had a more structured onboarding process. So they would do screening, they would do interviews, and then they would hand the family members off to the non-family members within the business units for additional interviews and ultimately a recommendation on hiring. Another piece was to ensure there was more regular feedback for each of those cousins up until this point. There really hadn't been much professional feedback, and it was something when we asked them, would you like to get feedback? They said yes. Getting more direction would be incredibly helpful, and we don't get enough of it. And setting up a process of also communicating with the non-family managers. So there was definitely a gap here where the non-family managers, they were overseeing these family members, and for the most part, they were doing a good job, but there really wasn't good communication there. And there was this gap and sometimes a sense of tension or competition between the family members and the non-family members in the business. Whether or not that was real or not, who knows? But it was certainly something that wasn't being talked about, and it was something that this group was going to help to address. providing professional development to the third generation through more formal mentoring, coaching opportunities if that was needed, was another thing. And then providing space for G3 to gain experience working together as a team and to learn from the second generation was another piece of this. So after about 2 years or so of having the Leadership Development Committee in place, there were a couple positive changes for each of these members of the family. First, the group met with Khalid to really understand what his career interests were and to lay out a plan and a set of goals for him to work towards over the next 3 years. Part of what he had said was, I really want to get to know the business better overall. And so they designed a 24-month rotation program. They kept him in the electronics business because he was doing a good job. It felt a little bit disjointed for him to rotate through the 3 different business units at this point in time. But they thought, and it is probably likely that he was going to ascend to more of a leadership role within the electronics business over the long run. So the rotation program made sense. So over those 24 months, the idea was that he was going to spend 6 months to 9 months in different departments across the group to really get an understanding of the various functions and to broaden his business skills. After he did that, what they ultimately happened was, e-commerce is becoming a much bigger piece of the trading environment. And they were starting a new e-commerce division for the electronics business. And they thought Khalid could be a really good fit for that, given his experience in data analytics, given the fact that he's quite strategic and numbers focused, and a lot of that fits well with an e-commerce business. He transitioned into a new role to head that business after the rotation program. And he was quite excited about it. So that's where he is today. Abdullah continued in the quick service business. He was paired with one of the independent directors of the board who was an expert in supply chain. He was quite seasoned as an executive for a multinational company, and he was open to providing mentoring to Abdullah at this point in his career and to help him work on his communication and his ability to kind of build consensus within the group. So that mentor was quite effective in working with him. He helped give him some advice based on his own experience, gave him some books, and we saw a change. It was really interesting in terms of how Abdullah was thinking about the problems he was seeing, how he was framing those issues, and how he was starting to communicate with the non-family members that he was working with, but also with his uncles. After 5 years in the business, he actually decided to go to London Business School. He had had some really good experience in the business, but he felt a little bit like he had plateaued in his role. He wanted to get out there, maybe gain some additional experience, build a better network. And so he asked his uncles if that would be something that they'd be open to. They were delighted. They said, great, an MBA, we don't have one of those yet in the family. And so he left, but with the understanding that he'd come back after the 2 years with hopefully a good network that could potentially help the family business. And then ultimately they would work with the Leadership Development Committee to think about what a new role could be for him that would be more of a leadership role going forward. Hamza ended up meeting with one of the independent director that sits on the CLD, and they had a very frank discussion about kind of how he's perceived in the workplace, and really to understand what his longer term interests were with regard to the business. And I think through that discussion, Hamza realized that at this point in time, maybe the family business isn't the best place for him, and maybe he isn't the best cultural fit. He ultimately decided to leave, and he ended up working with a friend of his who had started a real estate business locally, and the two of them were a pretty good partnership. I don't have it on the slide, but the uncle actually invited Hamza to join him in a real estate investment trust where the family had a board seat. And the uncle actually thought that he would be a good successor for that potential seat. So things were pretty amicable, and thankfully they were able to have those that communication effectively and kind of move to a good solution for him. For Sarah, she was also paired through the CLD with a mentor who was a family office director in another family that had a much more structured setup than they did. She was also provided assistance in enrolling in a family office executive education program. I think it was in Switzerland. And then they revisited her role and goals and started to devise some specific initiatives that she could work towards in terms of structuring the family office. And I think part of it was to start to think about some different verticals within that family office that could start to be defined. So one piece of it was the legal and compliance work related to the holding company. Another piece of it was helping with the accounting needs for the family. And then the third piece was on general family services. So helping with education programs for the family, helping with planning the family trips, and overseeing more of the family governance efforts that the family was starting to put in place. And through that, she also became chair of their newly established family council, which was responsible for helping to continue to strengthen unity within the family, to work on development of the next generation, and to help take a more structured approach to the annual family trips, which was usually planned by one particular branch, which rotated every year. So that is, those were the outcomes from the work of this group.
Great.
Beyond that, the Committee for Leadership Development also helped to address some more systemic concerns that both generations had. They established a regular check-in process with the G3s, which took place every 6 months or so. They put in place an annual performance feedback process, which took place in the fourth quarter of every year. And they organized the first G2, G3 one-day offsite. And this was an opportunity for the brothers with the cousins in the third generation who worked in the business to spend a day together, talking about the business, talking about their observations, and thinking about where they're headed as a family that owns these business assets together. And they started to hold, building off of that, quarterly G2, G3 forums where they would come together for 2 to 3 hours, and they would speak openly about what they were observing in their roles. So it was an opportunity for G3, for Khalid and Abdullah in particular, to really talk about what they were seeing in their various roles in the electronics and the quick service business. And it was an opportunity for Sarah to share what she's working on within the family office and to get feedback in terms of things that would be helpful for her to continue to work on to provide the support that the family was looking for from that particular group. Hilla?
Great. So I think you've heard us really deep dive on a case and a specific example, but we just wanted to leave a couple of thoughts with you. While we've sort of talked you through what the CLD did, the Committee for Leadership Development did in the case of that family, I think you can think more broadly as the Committee for Leadership Development as playing the role of HR and talent development across the life cycle of a family employee. So that could include really focusing on attracting the next generation, making the rules of the game clear for them, letting them know what the family's stance is towards family members coming in, actively recruiting them and helping with their onboarding process, making sure that they're paired with the right mentors, buddy, and support so that they land well and also have the right exposure and training to the business. A key part of what the CLD will do is around appraisal and development. So we've talked about performance management, making sure they get feedback, making sure that they get input from other assessments, such as 360s where needed, engagement and retention, making sure, in the example that Sam gave, the communication between both generations was so important to make sure that they really understood each other and that concerns were getting addressed. And then, of course, there may be cases where the right decision is for a family member to exit, and the CLD can play a role in handling those situations with grace and with tact. So that's sort of the overall spectrum of tasks and activities that the CLD can engage in. I think we'd like to leave you before we get into Q&A. We know we're a little bit short on time, but a few closing thoughts. One is that, there aren't any silver bullets when it comes to employment of family members. It's not that there's only one answer or a right answer. But I think in our experience and what we tried to illustrate to you through the case was that actually putting a structured approach in place can go a really long way. First of all, to make sure that families are working proactively on the development and progression of family members, making decisions in a way that can be seen as transparent and fair across the family.
Ada, can you comb face hair?
Sam, you may want to mute yourself. And finally, creating a space to have conversations that may be difficult within the family. So we hope that you found this helpful and illuminative. And, we'd love to take any questions if we still have a little bit of time. Dr. Sohail?
Okay. Yeah.
Hilla, there are a number of great questions in the Q&A, which maybe we could sample from.
Absolutely.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Hilla and Sam, for this insightful webinar. And I can't stress this enough. As I said, we have launched the ADR program here. We ended up right now with 62 claims or cases. And if you explore some of these cases thoroughly and dive in them, you will see that the main reasons behind these conflicts are succession planning and the employment, salaries, HR disagreement, etc. Something related to this department. So if you can prevent this issue early, you won't end up, inshallah, in the court or in the ADR program. And you can sustain and grow your family businesses further. And we started late, so if you can allow us for 15 minutes, mashallah, we have numerous excellent questions. Some of the questions about the material in Arabic, don't worry, inshallah, we will translate and send this material and publish it. And also even the recording, inshallah, it's going to be published in our website and on YouTube. Let me start with the committee. How can you assess and identify potential family leaders? Hilla or Sam?
Hilla, you want to take that?
Keep the answers short so we can answer as much as we can.
Absolutely. So how to identify, maybe I'll take a quick stab at it and Sam, you can add on. I think there's multiple data points, right? And it's not something I think that you should think of as a one-time exercise, but it's a process, right? So, it's a matter of making sure that you're getting good feedback from the business on a regular basis. It's a matter of making sure you're talking regularly to the employee to understand how things are going, what their challenges may be, maybe doing a 360 from time to time, maybe doing external assessments from time to time, maybe getting feedback from a mentor from time to time, so that you start to form a much more rounded picture of the person. And you're not just reliant on one person's opinion, right? And it's about forming that picture over time and also giving the process a bit of time and being a little bit patient. Maybe an employee is put in one department where it's not a great fit. maybe that was just a bad placement. Maybe they would really flourish somewhere else. So, you know, that may not be a satisfying answer, but I think it's a matter of looking at, it's a multifaceted problem. And so it has to be looked at from multiple facets to really understand each person's capability, their drive, and their potential. Sam, anything you would want to add on?
No, I agree with that completely. I think one assessment or series of assessments doesn't answer the question. You need to work on it over time and observe, and then make a call in terms of, you know, who you think might be the right people for that role.
Okay, and actually we have two questions related to the differences in preparing next generation based on your experience, between Saudi Arabia and the different countries. As you know, all these issues are sometimes context specific, and people are different, are subjected to different rules, different cultures, different religions. Also, the family structure is different. So, what are the differences that you documented or faced?
I can take a stab at this, and maybe Hilla, you can jump in. I think first off, you know, I've worked with 4 or 5 different families in Saudi Arabia over the past 8 to 10 years or so. And it was interesting because my first experience, you know, I thought I really understood, you know, how the next generation, what the next generation of Saudi business owning families needed in terms of development. But then I started to meet some of these other families, and I realized it really is different from one family to the next in terms of what their needs are. So I want to be really careful not to generalize too much here in terms of context, because I think you know, some families are more advanced and some families than others when it comes to development. I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I've noticed is it really comes down to the values of the family. And so what I'm getting at is, you know, families that value education and value instilling a sense of working at an early age tend to have a more structured approach themselves to next generation development within their own family systems. There are other families that we've worked with in Saudi Arabia that are more, I would say, insular, a little bit more clan-based, where there's a sense that the parents are coddling their children a little bit more and taking care of them. And in those particular families, what we see is that there's a real need for robust next generation development to help the parents and the next generation think about, you know, where they are in their lives, what are the goals they want to focus on, and to help them think about resources to support their development. So, you know, I guess, you know, we do a lot of work in Asia, and the Asian families we work with, the next generation are pretty hard driving. They're very academic, and they're you know, very focused on their studies and getting really good grades. In the GCC-based families, we don't see quite as much of that. So there's more of a need to really do some more heavy lifting to focus on, you know, how are we going to develop the next generation to really get them to the point where they are thinking about being good owners of these businesses in the future, and future leaders. So I think next generation development, from my perspective, for the families we work with in the GCC is more important than it is in some of the other families we work with in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and maybe I would just add on to that. I agree with what Sam said, that a lot of the dynamics that we see are universal, right? There may be elements of context that are a bit different, but the challenges around employment of family members are not very different, whether you're sitting in Saudi Arabia, or you're sitting in the Philippines, or you're sitting in Singapore, or other parts of the world that are sort of at a similar stage of development.
I see. Excellent. So this is a question from Abdullah Nahad. He's asking about, in your opinion, what's the optimal human resources policy regarding the employment, the compensation, and how can we mitigate the risks of nepotism or favoritism?
Should I? Maybe I can take
Go for it, Hilla.
and we can add on. I don't know if there's one optimal policy, but I think what structures like the CLD try to do is to create objectivity in the process, right? So it's not one person making decisions. It's a group of people who have the right qualifications and mindset, who are coming together and debating issues we're all wearing ideally the same hat of doing what's right for both the family and the business, right? And making decisions that are made in a way that is objective so that they can talk about it to other people and they can explain to the family why a certain decision was made, right? That part of it is also really important. So I think those sort of processes help create a sense of meritocracy, a sense of fairness, and a sense of objectivity in the process, right? And having some external lenses is also helpful. So some form of an external assessment, some form of let's say an independent director or a mentor who's also engaging with the next gen and giving an opinion. Some lens of, okay, what has been this person's performance trajectory? Why has this person been given a role versus someone else, right? So bringing in as many data points, as objectivity and as much transparency, we think can help. Of course, it's never going to be perfect, and there may always be cases where someone feels something was unfair, but doing things, bringing as much objectivity and transparency into the process, we think can help a lot.
Excellent. Actually, the main point or the keyword that you said is merit-based policy. And I think it's really important to be objective and to just set the policy on a merit-based, either the compensation, the salary, the employment itself. The issue that we are seeing here in the National Center of the Family Businesses that some of the family members think that the family business itself is the last resort. If no one hires me, okay, I will be hired by the business itself, which is an issue. This leads us to the final question about, and I think it's really important, how can the family charter, the family constitution mitigate this issue, either the succession plan or the employment itself?
Do you want to take it or should I?
I can take it. I think, so the family constitution, first off, I think in the family constitution itself, it's an opportunity to define what are the principles and guidelines and processes that you want to follow with regard to family employment and the Committee for Leadership Development. So in the families that we've worked with that have put in place a structure like this, they actually create a charter for their Committee for Leadership Development that defines what its responsibilities are, which we showed on that other slide, who the members are, how decisions are going to be made, how frequently it's going to meet, and then they have to bring that to life. So, the family constitution is a piece of paper. So, you have to take that and then you have to implement it. And I think that's the really important thing here. So, what we tried to highlight today is that, this was a family that actually had this in their family constitution, and then they brought it to life through working on these initiatives that were defined in the presentation.
Dr. Sohail, before we wrap up, sorry, there's one question in the chat that I thought was a really important one. Would you mind if we quickly address? Yeah. Because Muhammad asked, what are other solutions for a family member with an aggressive personality similar to the person mentioned in the case study? And I wanted to address this one because I didn't want people to come away from this with the impression that, okay, if someone is aggressive and not an obvious fit, then, the only answer is exit. That just happened to be what was right in that situation. It doesn't have to be the only path. I think there could be, we've seen examples of where, through coaching and through feedback, people have been able to adapt their styles and become really learn to work much better with the organization. Sometimes it's a lack of self-awareness, it's a lack of feedback, and people don't know that there is a problem. But once they're aware of it, and once they get a bit of help, they really can tackle it if they want to, right? So we've definitely seen cases where the will is there, of course, people can learn and grow, right? I think the other point that I'd love to make is that at the end of the day, a bit of aggression is not a bad thing. Sometimes family businesses might be too complacent. Sometimes maybe they need someone to come in and shake things up a little bit in a way that works, right? And not in a way that creates organ rejection. But maybe there could be a valid reason, let's say, to create a role for someone like that, where they get the chance to sort of shake things up a little bit, but doing it in a way that can still work within the organization. So maybe it's about setting up a new venture. Maybe it's about changing a part of the business that isn't working. There may be ways for the family to actually channel that aggressive behavior in a way that's quite productive for the family. So I just wanted to make sure that one of the takeaways from this session wasn't that aggressive people who don't fit need to leave.
Great. Just a quick remark regarding the family constitution. As you know, that the new corporate law in Article 11, it talked about the family businesses and the family constitution or the family charter. And it makes the family constitution legally binding if you put it in the articles of association. So as Sam mentioned, you can, in the family constitution, you can make it mandatory for all the family members, and you can write down the committee, the leadership committee or development, their responsibilities, their structure, their compensation, and how many members are there in the committee, the percentage of independent directors, etc. And it's a good way, it's a legal document, but I think it's a good way to resolve any issues or to prevent any issues in the future. Any final remarks, Hilla and Samuel, before we wrap up the webinar?
No, just to say thank you.
Thank you for the time.
And thank you to our audience. While we didn't get to see you, we got some great questions, and we hope you took away something from today.
Okay, great. As Hilla mentioned, thank you for joining us. Alhamdulillah, the audience today are great, and inshallah, we hope that you found this session informative and insightful. Many thanks for Hilla and Sam for preparing this insightful document and presenting the case study. And as I said, inshallah, we will publish it in Arabic and send out the recording and publish it in YouTube and in our website. Just to remind you that you will see a QR when you close the webinar. Please answer it, and it's gonna give us insights about this event or webinar, and also what are the topics that you want us to discuss in the future. Thank you again, inshallah, and we hopefully see you in future events presented by the National Center of the Family Businesses. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you.